Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from in the world today. Welcome to another surprisingly fabulous Power to Fly Chat and Learn event. Now, before we dive in, I just want to go over some quick housekeeping items. Really important if maybe you haven't joined us for a Power to Fly event in a while, or if this is your first one, in which case, welcome. We're so happy to meet you today. Now, my name's Meg. I'm going to be your host today. But one thing I want to highlight for all of you before we jump in is that this event is all about you. It's about our attendees, our community members, and making sure that you all get the answers that you came to get today. So to that end, you are more than encouraged to participate if you would like. You can do that in a couple different ways. You can turn your cameras on if you would like to share your smiling, maskless faces with us safely. No pressure to be Instagram perfect. I think I was rocking 4 days worth of messy bun and dry shampoo before I finally, caved and showered this morning. So, it does not matter, y'all, whether you are coming from a non-traditional workspace, if you've got furry coworkers leaning over your shoulder, if you have, child supervisors who are making sure that you are staying on task. We love to see it. So please feel free to meet us however you are. Now, if you have any kind of privacy issues or anything like that, totally understand. But as long as you don't come off mute today, you will not show up on either the live stream or the recording. So just remember that if you've got, any kind of concerns there, just don't come off mute and you'll be good. Now, if you do want to participate elsewhere, if you want to send in questions or comments for the speaker, please feel free to send that in the group chat. I'll be in there throughout the duration of today's event, sharing links and all kinds of stuff. Y'all can also connect with each other there. But just let me know if you've got questions you'd like raised to the speaker, send them in on that group chat. Now, like I said earlier, today's session is being recorded. We're also live streaming it to our website, as well as our YouTube channel. Now, what that means for all of you is that you don't have to take notes. You get to sit back, relax, and enjoy Megan's expertise that she's going to bring and share with us today. So please feel free to do that. Just know that, if Megan says something completely like mind-blowing today and you cannot wait to share it with a coworker or a friend or a relative, you do not have to. So how this is all going to work is in about 1 to 2 business days, so probably Friday or Monday next week, y'all will get an email from Power to Fly. Everybody that registered will get one. And it's going to give you a link to where you can rewatch this recording when we post it on our website. Now, if you don't want to wait the 1 to 2 days, you don't have to. You can always head over to our YouTube channel. Like I said, we're live streaming there now, but these videos are usually posted within about 5 to 15 minutes of the end of the live stream. So you can always head over there. You can search a large chunk of our recorded chats and our archives there on our YouTube channel. But you can also check out and search our entire archives. Every event we've ever had has been archived on Power to Fly. So please feel free to take advantage of those free resources. Now, like I said, we are live streaming to our YouTube channel. You can also keep up with us on our various social media channels. We are at Power to Fly on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And you are more than welcome to, take photos or video as we go, share it out to your social networks, anything we can do to increase awareness of these free Power to Fly resources. And, anything we can do to do that, we are happy to do. So if you want to tag us in anything, we would love to reshare, retweet, repost, whatever y'all tag us in. So please feel free to do that. Like I said, if you do have a question, please feel free to message me in the chat. If you would like to remain anonymous, but you have a question or a comment, you can always DM it to me directly. Now, our guest today is here on behalf of Cockroach Labs. Now, I'm going to share the link to their company page on Power to Fly with you all in just a moment here. But something that you should know is this page is what their company page looks like on powertofly.com. Now, when you go to the link that I'm putting in the chat thread right now, you'll be able to see this page. You can also, you can search all of their open positions. You can take a look and get more information about company benefits, what the org is all about. So really, really great stuff there. Now, if you are, let's say that you're actively job seeking and, Cockroach Labs kind of catches your eye and you want to apply to some roles. If there's nothing there that suits you, I recommend that you take a look at the top right-hand corner on that page. There's going to be a big pink button that says follow. Clicking that is going to put you on Cockroach Labs follow network, and it does some really great stuff for you behind the scenes. But effectively what it does is it functions like your friend at Cockroach Labs. So it's going to let Cockroach Labs know that you are interested in working with them even before you fill out an application. But it's also going to make sure that Cockroach Labs stays on your radar because Power to Fly will let you know when they post new roles. So a really great way to kind of take some of the tedium and repetition out of job searching. I also very much recommend you join that follow network. If there's nothing that really suits you right now, that way you know when they post new roles, or even if you're not really job seeking at the moment, but you want to make sure that you don't forget about these great companies, clicking that follow button is a really great way to make sure that when you go to, maybe take a look and see what's out there later, you don't forget about awesome companies like Cockroach Labs. Now, Megan is here today on behalf of Cockroach Labs. Now, I'm really excited for y'all to meet her because she's been wonderful to get to know for the last couple of minutes. So Megan started her career in ad tech sales before she made the transition into people. Now, Megan was initially drawn to recruiting because she had been through some disappointing recruiting processes herself. I think that's pretty common among a lot of us that are job seekers. And so she felt like interviewing should be, shouldn't be this negative experience, should be easier. And so because she believes that people are a company's biggest strength and hiring amazing talent is that first step, this is something that has been central to her kind of work ethic and her goals throughout her transition. So now Megan is a senior recruiter at Cockroach Labs and focuses on scaling the marketing and education teams while also working with the greater recruiting team to build processes and programs that make for an efficient, equitable, and enjoyable recruiting experience. Megan, I'm so happy that we get to talk to you today. I'm so happy to welcome you to the stage. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience? Anything else you think they should know about you before we dive in?
Yeah, thanks, Meg. Two Megans on the call makes it very easy. But thank you for that introduction and for introing Cockroach Labs. And thank you all so much for being here. I'm so excited because this is something that's obviously super near and dear to my heart. I made a pretty big, it always feels big, but a big career transition. And I'd love to kind of talk through what that process looked like. So as Meg mentioned, I started in ad tech sales. I did that for the first 5 years of my career before kind of serendipitously making the move into recruiting, which I'm happy to talk through what that looked like. But really it did stem from this experience that I had of just realizing that every interview process I'd gone through had been super transactional and it didn't feel very human. And it felt like you're focusing on kind of fitting candidates into a box versus really setting them up for success in a role. And so I'll tell that story a little bit more later, but that's really what got me interested in recruiting. But before doing that, I knew that I wanted to make the move out of ad tech. So I had gone through so much soul searching to figure out what that was going to look like, what companies to look at, what verticals to look at, and what does that actually mean for you, right? Because making any transition is intimidating and a little scary, a lot scary if you're me. And I think that just took a lot of really kind of putting away my ego and thinking through, well, what's the long-term investment here? So we'll talk through all of that and we'll talk through some tips for interviewing. But as Meg said, drop questions into the chat. We're going to go through some pre-submitted questions as well, but drop them in, we'll get to them. And if we don't, we can always follow up on the offline as well. Excellent. Oh, one thing I did want to mention, Meg, if anyone's open to it, would love to have people drop into the chat what they're hoping to transition from to, because I think that can also help frame some of the conversation as well. So if you know, or maybe you don't know, but if you do know, feel free to drop that in and we'll keep an eye on that as well.
Love it. Thank you for that call out. All right, last thing we're going to talk about before we dive into questions is some of the main takeaways you can expect to get today. Now, we identified these both via conversations with Megan, as well as by looking at the questions that you all submitted when you registered for today's session. So all of this to say, if you have a question and you're not sure if we're going to get to it, ask it in the chat. If we get to one of your questions, but we need a little bit more context or you want to give us more information, please feel free, put it in the chat. If you've got questions or comments, maybe your lived experience is different than what Megan has experienced. Let us know. Y'all took time out of your day to be here with us live. We want to make sure that the time that you spend with us is well worth it. So let me know what questions you want to know so that way we can get you answers. We're going to talk about some of the ways the ways that soft skills are a key to that successful transition. We're going to discuss some interview tips that would help you to get hired, or at least keep, making it beyond further and further into the interview process. We're going to talk about how you can advocate for yourself, even if you don't have the required experience, which I feel like a lot of us would find ourselves in that position when transitioning, as well as how you can approach a pay cut while still understanding your value, which is something that was, I've done at least twice in my career. So I'm very interested to see what Megan's opinions are on these. Yeah. So to dive us into questions, I want to start off with asking what it's like to go from sales to recruiting. What was that transition like for you, and what challenges did you really see during that shift?
Yeah. So making the move from sales to recruiting was, it's interesting, right? That's actually a more similar skill set than I would have thought. And I don't think I really appreciated how transferable my kind of sales and account management background was to recruiting. I mean, when you really boil it down to what the role is, it's about connecting with people, both roles, sales, recruiting, it's connecting with people. On the sales side, you're connecting with your clients, and they have to build trust in you as a human before they can build trust in the company or the product. But the interesting thing with sales is that it's not as, it can feel not as genuine, right? At the end of the day, it's a sale that you're making. You're selling a product in return for revenue. And while I found that super rewarding and I really enjoyed it and I loved that type of work, I realized that the idea of being a recruiter and kind of selling a company and helping build relationships with candidates and really helping advocate for those candidates was more in line with my kind of values as a person. And so it is kind of interesting though. I wasn't necessarily like, I'm definitely going to become a recruiter. That's my career transition. That's the one for me. As I mentioned at the beginning, I had initially started going through some other interview processes when I was right prior to joining Cockroach. And I had some really icky experiences. I had one where I'd made it through the entire process and I was in references, and then I literally got ghosted, which is something that I've learned a lot about since becoming a recruiter, and how common that is. And so what happened for me and kind of how I ended up on this path is I was exploring all these different options and paths. I was looking at urban farming. I was looking at some really cool fintech companies. I was mostly looking at little startups, little or smaller companies, because I felt like I could really wear a lot of hats and learn a lot all at the same time. But so I'd had these bad experiences. And then in parallel to that, I actually met Lindsay Grenewald, who's our Chief People Officer. And I met her through a mutual connection at an event. And we just got to talking. I didn't really know what Cockroach Labs was. Databases were kind of foreign to me, very, very foreign to me at the time. And she was, though, telling me a little bit about what her role is as a Chief People Officer. At that time, we were much smaller. So she was really focused on putting the processes and programs in place to make a really equitable interview process. And a couple of the things that she really talked about was the fact that Cockroach Labs doesn't use resumes, which blew my mind, right? Because we're so used to, and we're going to talk about this, but we're so used to kind of resumes being the only way that you're evaluated. And then in order to actually evaluate candidates, Cockroach built out an exercise-based interview process, which really allows people's skills to show that if and how they'll be successful in the role, versus just saying, well, you went to this school, you've done these things in your resume, you're a good fit or you're not. And that whole conversation really, really impressed me and kind of restored my faith in how companies are building their people functions. And so that's when I basically, 3 weeks later, after I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation, I shamelessly reached out to her and I asked her to get coffee just to learn a little bit more. And then the conversation kind of snowballed from there. And I was able to do exercises, right? So I was able to prove that even though I hadn't been a recruiter before, all of those skills that I built in sales and my EQ and all of the things that make me Megan Mueller could make me successful as a recruiting coordinator at Cockroach. And so eventually we made that transition together. And I'm beyond grateful that Lindsay took that chance on me, because reflecting 4 years later, it's 1,000% really changed my life, which is a pretty wild thing to say. But going back to actually making that transition, it was daunting a little bit, because I think, again, you're going from being an expert in something to feeling like you don't know anything. And it can be really overwhelming and it can be scary, but I was really lucky for two reasons. I think one of those was Lindsay. Lindsay was so invested in me as a mentor, as a manager. She literally, I was like glued to her for, I don't know, 6 months. I went to every meeting with her. I went to every call. I watched her work over her shoulder, which is crazy to think of now, but it made me realize like that's what made me learn so quickly. And I would not have done that had she not invested in me. But I do think the flip side of that is it was worth her while to invest in me, right? And it's worth any manager's while to invest in someone making a transition, because she got to really help nurture the skills. She got to help mold me to be of what she viewed to be very successful at Cockroach, right? And so that it was kind of mutually beneficial. That one-on-one time that we got to spend together was obviously a huge lift, but it should, and I think it did, pay off in the long run, in that I was able to really learn the right way versus having to sometimes break bad behaviors or bad habits that you naturally kind of acquire in a specific role. And then the other, I would say, benefit that felt almost like a challenge at the beginning was, and this is going to be a key theme, I think, of a lot of our conversation today, is I was pretty established in my role in ad tech sales. And I felt like I was in a good groove. I felt like I was, relatively senior. And I came on to Cockroach as a recruiting coordinator. And that felt, and it sounds like a step back, right? But what I realized is that, in addition to Lindsay being an amazing mentor, that's also what made me really successful, because I got to build this amazing foundation of how to build a candidate experience, really learning the systems, learning how to communicate with candidates and hiring managers, learning how to problem solve. All of those skills, I don't necessarily think I would have gotten had I jumped right into a recruiter role, because you're a little bit more kind of tunnel vision at that point. And so that's something that, again, it was a little bit of an ego check. And then once I realized how impactful that was, I was so grateful that I did it. And we've got a couple of the recruiting coordinators on my team here, and I'm so excited to see how they grow as well. And I think that's something that you just have to be aware of as you're going through this transition, is titles mean different things at every company, and they don't often mean a whole lot. And so you just have to be willing to kind of swallow that and say, listen, I'm making this transition for a reason. Who cares what my title is? And I'm going to learn as much as possible. And this is the path that my manager and I have decided is going to be best. So those two things, I would say, made the transition as honestly seamless as it possibly could have been.
I absolutely love that. Let me add myself there, and we'll spotlight you for everybody. There we go. I think that you made a lot of really great points there. And one of the things I want to highlight and kind of go back to and expand a little bit on is the parallels you saw between sales and recruiting. I've been in recruiting before. I have been in sales, and I was raised by a salesman. So it is something that I've seen a lot of parallels within. But from your perspective, actually having been working in sales, what parallels do you see there? Do you think that any of those kind of similarities between the fields really helped to make that transition, a little bit easier for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think the one that I noted already is just that kind of relationship building. That's crucial in any role, right? You need to get buy-in amongst internal stakeholders, external, that ability to really work cross-functionally and communicate value, important no matter what. So that really helped make that transition, I think, quite easily. But in addition to that, I think one of the things that a good salesperson does is it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, right? You're not trying to force a customer into a specific solution. You have to take a bit of a consultative approach. And that's something that I really love doing as a recruiter. I feel very fortunate that at Cockroach, we view you as a person, not as a resume, as I've mentioned. And we also view jobs as, a job description doesn't necessarily mean that's where the job's going to net out. So I love, as a recruiter, being able to kind of take that consultative approach and work with candidates and work with hiring managers to find a happy medium, to find a role that's going to set this amazing person with this amazing background up for success, while also, of course, being beneficial to the business. So that's now the most rewarding part of my job. And, not all companies view recruiting that way, view it with that flexibility, but we certainly do at Cockroach. And that's why, again, I think I've been able to be successful in making a transition here, because we crafted a role that made sense for my experience versus trying to force me into a specific box. So I think that what that kind of boils down to is just general flexibility and kind of creativity. And these are some of the soft skills too that I think you just develop and that are just naturally transferable. And we'll talk more about those soft skills in a second. But that creativity, I think, is also just lended to us really building an innovative recruiting process. And Lindsay laid that foundation, and then the rest of the team has really been able to build on that. But we have to be willing to try things too. And you kind of have to be willing to throw some stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And but you have to have a team that's on board to do that as well. So I would say that those, that kind of relationship building and that creativity and flexibility are some of the two biggest parallels that I see between sales and recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree strongly enough. It really is about creating relationships. And so whether it's in sales or in recruiting, if you treat it transactionally, it's not going to, you might succeed with kind of that first sale, but it's not going to continue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
So
great
and
point.
you don't, especially, that kind of parallels retention rates, right? For HR. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And we have to, we can't, just like in sales, you can't sell a product that doesn't exist, right? Or you can't lie about the features on a product. I mean, you can, but it's not going to end
but it's
well.
not advisable.
And in recruiting, you have to you can't sell something that doesn't exist. You have to be super transparent. And again, I guess you could do that, but then your retention rate, that people won't be happy. So I think that's something that candidates really appreciate through our process, is that we do really lead with transparency and openness. And we really want to ensure that candidates have a full idea of what a role is actually going to be like on that team, so that they're not caught off guard when they get here.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Okay. So I'm seeing a lot of people sharing in the chat thread here, what
Awesome.
industries y'all are in, where you want to transition to. Let's see, we've got somebody transitioning from the warranty division of the automotive industry into human resources. That's so cool. Software engineer to a PM, government contracting, transitioning to computer science, web dev, and cybersecurity. As well as Allison is transitioning from sales and client service in nonprofits, transitioning into a CSM. So these are great, y'all. Thank you for sharing. And if you didn't have a chance to, please feel free to share, what industry are you in and where are you trying to transition? So that way we can try and hopefully customize some of these answers for y'all. All right. So we talked a lot about kind of the transferable skill sets and the commonalities between sales and recruiting. But if you are not coming from sales into recruiting or vice versa, what do you think is the best way for us to identify our own transferable skills?
Yeah, I thought about this a lot when I was going through the process, because I had to write a resume too. And I think what's helpful is to break it up into buckets. So for me, I was thinking through, okay, what are the buckets that soft skills and projects that I've been working on can fall into? And I think one of those is communication. And there's so many things that fall under communication, right? But that is kind of the most transferable skill. And it feels obvious, but you should be able to kind of think through initiatives that you've done, either written, verbal, presenting, cross team communication, change management. All of those things really fall into that bucket. Another one I think is, interpersonal skills. How do you collaborate? How do you drive cross-functional change? How do you think about conflict resolution? What are examples that you've done in which you've done that before? Another one is leadership and management, right? Management or leadership doesn't have to mean that you're a manager, but when have you taken charge? When have you led a project? When have you mentored someone on the team? Project management, super important and super, again, transferable. I had to project manage a bunch of different initiatives in sales, and I have to do that now at Cockroach as a recruiter. So what are some examples of that? And then I also think thinking through areas of when you've been really strategic. So what are processes that you've built, initiatives that you've really driven the full cycle of strategy development on? Think of some examples for that. And so what I did is I built that kind of matrix, and I filled in examples of what that actually looked like in my current job at the time and previously the job before that. And also, what are some things, like some other initiatives that I took on that weren't in my role? And so an example of that is I was a really active interviewer at my company, which obviously translated very well to being a recruiter at Cockroach. So thinking through things like that. And then in addition to that, I'm also a big fan. This is not necessarily soft skills oriented, but you've got to keep like I don't like the term a brag list, but I keep a running doc of times when I feel really proud of projects that have been accomplished, or really amazing, recruiter or candidate feedback that I've gotten. What are some times that people have really acknowledged the amazing work that you've done? Keep a running tally of those. You're not going to send that document to anyone, but it's really helpful when you're kind of framing, well, what is, where have I seen all those successes, and how can that be transferable to my this job that I'm applying to? And then I think when you're actually thinking through how does that map to a role, you have to tie it to the job description itself. So job descriptions can be good or bad, but sometimes they're always going to be very clear under the requirements, or not the requirements, the expectations of the role, right? What you're going to be responsible for. Always try, especially when you're making this kind of transition, map those soft skills back to those you will, right? Back to the things that you're going to be responsible for. I was looking at my resume that I sent to Lindsay for this role, and there were a lot of examples of, again, there wasn't a huge day-to-day parallel between what I was doing in recruiting, but a lot of that cross-functional activity, a lot of that partnership, a lot of the data analysis that I was doing was all really relevant to the life of a recruiter. So that's what I pulled out, and that's what was in the job description. So use the job description as your friend. Don't think of it as a, shoot, I don't fit all of these requirements. Think of it as your guide for building out a resume that's going to complement the job description. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very similar to what we, tell people to do, or what the advice that I hear on a lot of these calls, because I get to sit through and listen to a lot of experts talk about, interviewing and hiring. And so, yeah, I think that dovetails really nicely. And I love your idea of kind of keeping a list of your wins. I had this suggested by a manager 2 or 3 jobs ago, where they said to create a kudos folder in your inbox.
I love that.
And then anything that comes in, if you haven't, if somebody like compliments in an email thread, or if there's a separate email that's sent, doesn't matter. You can either throw it into that folder, or you can tag it, copy down. Like I used to do screen grabs of because we use Slack internal messaging at my old company too. Mm-hmm. So I would do screen grabs of like somebody saying I did a particularly great job on something. So that way I could go back to that, not just for, stuff like this to try and identify my strengths, but also, like prior to performance reviews every year.
Right,
like I was able to really easily pull back and say, well, I've been consistently praised for blah, blah, blah. Or, I also worked a lot on this. Like, so that made it a lot easier for me, because like, I'm not good with, if I don't set it up and make it easy to do, I'm not going to keep doing it.
Right. And you forget, oh, that person, I did do a really good job on that project. And then you're moving on to the next one. So you kind of forget about it. Also, it's just really beneficial to read all of that amazing feedback, right? I think when you're making a career change, it can feel like, again, you're not qualified, you're not ready, you're not prepared. But then you read all these things and you're like, oh, I am, like, I'm amazing at what I do, and I'm going to be amazing at this new role too. And so you have to continue to build yourself up. I think you have to build that confidence, because again, this isn't an easy process. You're going to hear no, but you just have to continue to remind yourself that you're qualified.
Yeah. Yes. I'm loving this.
Also, one thing I wanted to mention, when you're thinking about kind of resumes, so you'll read on LinkedIn, cover letters are dead. Don't write a cover letter. And I disagree with that, especially for a career switcher. I think the argument is that a lot of companies, some larger companies maybe use crawlers, or the recruiters just don't read them at all. but I read every single resume that I get. I read every single cover letter. And I think that that's just a really great way to talk about your story. Tell your story. Tell the recruiter or the hiring manager why you want to make this change, why it's a good fit, why you're there. You might not see that on your resume, but let me actually tell you how I could be successful at XYZ company. And those, when I see those, I mean, they make me so happy. And I think people are often surprised when I reference them after, because people just assume that that recruiters don't read them. But take the time. It's also going to help you frame that story for yourself, because you're going to have to tell the story too. But if you can put it in words, I think it's going to be way more effective in the longer term for you. And then if you're afraid that someone's not going to read your resume, put a mission statement or read your cover letter, put a mission statement on your resume as well. So 1 to 2 sentences, what is the transition you're looking to do? And what are those skills that you're going to apply in order to do that? I think you've got to do the more upfront work, of course, when you're making this transition, but it'll pay off majorly when you're actually going through the process.
No, I think this is great advice. And honestly, so I'm 36. I'm not quite dinosaur age, but I'm rapidly approaching that point where, there's no
I
more.
would not say that, Meg.
No, but seriously though, I remember when applying to jobs and none of it was online. You had to call, you had to go drop off your resume in person. You had to send handwritten and stamped thank you notes after the interview. I remember doing all of this. And at no point was it ever explained to me in, high school, college, none of it was it explained to me. You're trying to show the hiring manager quickly why you would fit this role. Right. And so instead of making it, it didn't matter if it was all formatted correctly, it was, okay, but are you hitting the right points? Are you making it easy for them to understand? And I love your suggestion of using that cover letter or a mission statement to address, here's what the transition is that's happening. Because one of the things we recommend when people are writing cover letters is kind of use that to fill in any gaps in the story that would not be easily tracked, but just by reading your resume. And so you want them to read it and understand where you're coming from, but you also want them to still be interested in talking to you. You want them to think oh, I wonder how they did such and such, or I'm really curious to see how they think this skill will apply, how they can utilize their lion taming skills in this, in this role. So I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. And people, again, they're always surprised when we talk about their cover letters, because I think the assumption is that no one's looking at it. But just remember that recruiters are human too, and they want to help you. That's probably why they became a recruiter, is because you get to help people find jobs that they love and that they feel really fulfilled by. So, more times than not, a recruiter, if they're not responding, it's probably because they didn't see it, and actually there's a question that I wanted to touch on about that of someone had posted a question around, I'm reaching out to recruiters on LinkedIn and they're not getting back.
Yeah, that's actually our next question. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So it obviously it depends on where you're reaching out to. If you're reaching out to a recruiter at a large company, they're probably getting a ton of those every day. And so it's probably not that they're not responding or actively not responding to you. They probably just aren't seeing it. And so I think a couple different routes that you can go. And I get reached out to all the time, but I'll often get outreach that just says, hi, I'm interested in learning more about opportunities at Cockroach. And instead, I think something would be more meaningful of, if you tell the recruiter why that you're interested, or a specific role that you're interested in, or maybe you're interested in, there's a few different people in here around a couple questions. Actually, never mind. I just lost my train of thought. But I think that it's super impactful to, hold on. I'm completely losing my training of thought. Meg, what was I just saying? Oh,
there it is. It's okay. So you're talking about how people can best utilize LinkedIn
LinkedIn. Sorry, I was reading the questions. I cannot do both at once.
Nope, you're good.
But it's really impactful to send the message and really include again, those storytelling skills. So maybe it's just pulling stuff from your cover letter and saying, hey, Megan, I'm interested in joining Cockroach or learning more about Cockroach because I want to make the transition from the automotive industry to HR. What are some opportunities that we can talk through. Or I see that you don't have any openings, but could we do an informational interview, right? So things like that, like doing outreach so that you can get information from people is going to be super beneficial. It's not just, can I get an interview? It's, can I learn more from you? Another route is reach out to people that you're connected with, or if you know someone who's connected to them, ask them for an introduction. This is like the hardest part, I think, of changing your career, is that it feels a little, it's just, you have to be very vulnerable. You have to really put yourself out there. You have to say things like, hey, I don't know you at all, but can I just learn from you? And more times than not, people want to help, right? People want to lend their time, and they're probably proud of their experience, so they want to talk to you about it. And so I think going that route in addition to the recruiter route is really beneficial. Also, reach out to the hiring manager. You can find the hiring manager on the website, you can find them on LinkedIn. Our job descriptions always have the hiring manager. More times than not, they're going to just send you to they might forward your note to the recruiter, but then you're getting on their radar. So I think that, the more outreach, the better. It's something, again, like that's what I did with Lindsay. I sent her a note on LinkedIn and asked her for that conversation. And so you might have to send 100 of those to have one of them stick, but it's worth it because then that's one job that you just got, right? So definitely take the time, feel confident in that outreach. And it's okay if you get told no or you don't get responses, because eventually the more you do, the more they'll land.
Yes. Ooh, loving this.
Thank you.
And
Sorry.
No, that's good. No, that's excellent. Because I feel like, the person's question had been like, how can I better initiate these conversations to see if a company might be interested in what I bring to the table? And, based on what you said, it's not that it's not about what you're saying. Like, obviously, like, how you're wording these things is very important, but like Megan said, you want to go in and say like, hey, I'm interested in blah, blah, blah. Can we talk so that I can learn a little bit more about fill in the blank? I'm interested in transitioning from, the automotive industry into HR. You have a couple of roles that are posted. Could we have a discussion about like where I might fit within that team? Making it a pointed ask is going to help you a lot, because that way what you want is clear. So either the person can give it to you, or they can pass you off to somebody else who can give it to you if they're not available, or they can give you as much information as they have available. So having that pointed ask of like, here's what I'm trying to do. Can we talk about blah, blah, blah? Like that might be, more, not more in your favor. It might be an easier way for you to kind of come up with a formula. Because correct me if I'm wrong, Megan, but when you're doing all this reaching out, obviously you're not sending everyone the same like, hello, recruiter, like, text and or copy paste thing. But you don't have to reinvent the wheel with every single one, right?
No. And you should, again, if you're applying to a recruiter role and an HR role and a sales development role, you'll want to have 3 tailored messages, right? Because the outreach is going to be different, but you don't have to do super custom outreach to Megan and then another custom one to Meg. It can be, you'll want to tailor it slightly, but you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Absolutely not. So that's where kind of it's the heavy investment up front that will pay off when you're actually doing the outreach.
Yeah. Now, one last question regarding resumes before we keep moving. Darcy had asked in the channel or in the Zoom chat about references. Do you recommend them listed out or write available upon request? I also I wouldn't be sure what to tell them either, because I think the last time I used references on a resume was when I was really fresh out and just did not have professional references to give people.
So we always check references at Cockroach, and we view them as a data point of the interview process. So we don't really make the decision to officially move forward until after we've checked references. And we do that because we really want to make sure that we can set this person up for success at Cockroach. References in general are very positive, but they're very helpful in getting advice for how we can make sure that Meg is successful as XYZ at Cockroach, right? And so they're a really important conversation for us. That being said, don't waste the space on your resume. Don't include them. You don't even need to say, when I see references furnished upon request, I don't even think about it. I would just remove that, save the space, make it cleaner. And if a company wants to do them, they're going to ask for them. they're typically going to ask after the last round, so the on-site loop or the virtual loop, they'll ask for you to send a couple of references. At Cockroach, I always ask for at least one former manager, and then sometimes two, but always one, and then typically a peer, and that's worked really closely with the candidate. But typically only two, and I'll just call them afterwards, and we'll talk for 10 to 15 minutes. And again, they're great. You know, it's really fun also as a recruiter to hear people like gush about the candidates that we're about to hire, and it always gets me even more excited about bringing someone onto the team. So just have them in your back pocket.
I love that. I love that you you look for a past manager as well as a teammate, because I think that you're right. That's going to give you a completely different impression of that person, because like, how you relate to your manager might be slightly different than how you relate to or work with your team members. So I think that's wonderful. I love the kind of holistic approach you're taking here. All right, let's talk pay cuts. This person had written in saying, I recently took one while transitioning, and it's been hard on my individual economy as well as my ego. How can we approach a pay cut while still understanding and advocating for what our value is?
Yeah. So this can be one of the biggest challenges of making a career transition, because, you typically you have to adjust your expectations around leveling and things like that. That being said, something that I think is really important is to think about the why. Like, why are you changing careers, right? You're changing it because you maybe want something a bit more fulfilling. You want more flexibility. You want a happier role. You want a better culture. All of those things to me add up to, and at Cockroach, actually, this is how we approach it. It's kind of like the total compensation philosophy or the total rewards package, right? Because yes, cash is important. That's how we live. Equity is super important, especially when you're joining a smaller stage company, but also benefits and culture and impact and career growth. Those are all really important too. That's why I joined Cockroach, all of those things, and the equity, to be honest. But you have to remind yourself that at every company, the compensation philosophy is going to be different. If you're joining or if you're applying for a larger stage company, a public company, you're going to see higher cash, but you might not see upside in things like equity. If you're joining a startup, like at Cockroach, when I joined early days, the salary was lower, but I got equity that really made me feel like I was making up for that. And what I had to decide, and a grain of salt here as well, I made this transition when I was 26. I was responsible for my expenses and student loans and things like that, but I don't have kids. There was just not as much kind of weighing on the financial decision, but I basically created a number in my head of what I needed to live my life. And I worked with Lindsay to make sure that I could get there. It was very reasonable and it made sense for the role that I was doing, but it also made sense for internal equity and not creating any unfairness with the team. And the trade-off that I was making in the short term was that investment from Lindsay and was that career growth. And honestly, like the true happiness that I was getting from the role and the culture and all of these things that just were exactly what I was looking for. And that I decided I was willing and able to make that short-term cash pay cut, essentially. Now, since then, I've really, of course, been able to grow a lot, improve myself, and make sure that I'm continuing to see incremental, increases, and that I'm growing as a recruiter at Cockroach to where I feel like I made the right decision. I would make this decision 100 times over. But you really do have to sit down with yourself, I would say, even before the process starts, even before you've decided what that transition is, because you've really got to think through what are my core values, what are the things that I'm willing to trade, and what are the things that I can't trade. And it's super personal, of course, it's a very personal decision, but I think that if you're getting to this point to where you're looking to make a career switch, you're probably open to maybe that short-term shift in comp.
Yeah. And I think you make a really good point, right? Is that, there might be a set range or something that is like, that's the company rules. And this is how much this position can, potentially pay. Like, this is where you max out. But there, like you said, it's always encouraged to ask about additional, like ask about separate compensation, ask about benefits, ask about, flex time when it comes to, maybe you're like you're a triathlon runner and you want to be able to come in an hour later in the day so you can get that morning run in. Like, talk about these kinds of things. Like what else would be a trade-off that would add value for you in this career that maybe doesn't necessarily translate into a dollar figure added to the bottom line. Companies
not right now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But maybe you get to work from home, or you can work from anywhere in the world. All of those things, if you've identified, okay, those are in line with my values, then that's where those trade-offs come into play. I also think it's kind of piggybacking on what you said, Meg, you've got to have the conversations up front with recruiters around what's the career growth here? What's my potential? Because you want to know that you're going to be able to see those incremental wins, those leveling increases. If obviously you're performing well, you need to make sure that those exist. So what does that look like? What is the review process at XYZ company? Is it annual? Is it biannual? Am I expected to see a raise every year? Talk through those things. I think compensation has a stigma against it of being like really tough to talk about, but you should talk about it at every step of the process. You should bring it up in your initial conversation. Hopefully the recruiter is, but if they're not, bring it up. Think through.
Well, even if it's uncomfortable, like it's uncomfortable, but it's necessary, right? Like none of us does this for free.
And you don't want to waste your time, right? No one wants to waste their time, especially when you're transitioning to a new role. You're spending so much more time probably preparing for the interviews, right? Don't do that until you know that it's worth your while. And I think, again, you might, even if you have that conversation and it's a number that's lower than where you want to be, think through if that still makes sense for you. Think through, again, if those trade-offs within the sphere of that particular role work to your advantage well enough for it to be a worthwhile move.
Yeah. Okay, great. Now let's talk about, from your position within HR now, do you think it's really possible to compete with another candidate who has relevant experience for the position? Do you feel like you tend to hire people with non-related experience? What do you see most often when it comes to people that are transitioning?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's definitely nuanced because it can depend on the role. Some of the roles are highly specialized. We look for a very specific skill set when it comes to those, because maybe they're much more senior roles or they're a very specific area of the business. That being said, one of the things that I love so much about being a recruiter at Cockroach is that we do these exercise-based interviews. So no one is seeing your resume. No one, other than myself as a recruiter, no one knows anything about you. They don't know where you're coming from. They don't know where you went to college or what classes you took or anything about your skills. You're evaluated purely based on an exercise, 4 different exercises that we've identified are kind of the keys to success for that role. And the reason I bring that up is because we actually have the data to prove, yes, you can get the job when someone else might be more qualified on paper. And we see that time and time again. You look at a resume and you're like, oh, they've got all the things, they're going to do great. And then the person who doesn't have that experience ends up being strong yeses across the board because they're putting in more effort. They're putting in the time to really prepare. They're able to apply those soft skills that we've already talked about to the interview process. And the team feels like they're going to be a great collaborative fit. So there are plenty of times that happens. It doesn't, again, at these more kind of specific roles, that's where it is harder. And that's why I do think when you're looking at a transition, it is definitely advantageous to look at more generalized roles, but it's 100% doable. And I wouldn't be saying this if it wasn't. We've seen it happen at Cockroach. And I do think, though, you have to look at companies that really value an interview process too. Companies will call out when they're open to folks that don't fit every requirement. And that's unrealistic that everyone's going to fit every requirement always. But you've got to just kind of be willing to do the research, find those companies, reach out to people, really prepare for the interviews, and your experience will really show for itself. So, it happens all the time. And I think even one of the first people that I hired was someone who is an amazing writer, but didn't have experience with, B2B software. And he really put time into preparing, and he showed that he was capable, and we hired him, and he's been like one of the best hires I've ever made as a result. So you really have to, you look at the potential as well.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, honestly, it's very similar to what we do at Power to Fly. I interviewed for my original role twice before I got it. And then it was, one of those things where it was like, okay, well, I don't have any experience in this, but we love your attitude. And so we'll train you up to do this. So yeah, I mean, like showing commitment in those kinds of ways, it's just another way to underscore soft skills, right? It's another way to underscore something like your curiosity or your work ethic.
Exactly. Your humility is super important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. This person had written in with a little bit more of a specific ask. They said, I'm looking to move out of marketing, but all of my titles have been very niche, and I'm concerned that this could impact my opportunity for positions outside of that industry. What strategy would you recommend for landing an interview with a recruiter when we have non-related experience at the roles we're applying for? So I think this is a really good question, right? Because there are people that transition, they've got 10, 12, 15 years under their belt in a certain industry. So let's talk about how we can position those skill sets that are not related, but do show, positive things about us as employees.
Yeah. And I think without necessarily knowing the exact transition that this person is making, it's a little harder, but I think all of the things that we've already talked about apply, right? It's you've obviously learned and done so much in those 15 years. What are those leadership opportunities that you've taken on? What are those areas that you've really driven strategy improvements and process improvements? All of those things are super applicable to really most jobs out there. So how do you really kind of tell that story? It's all about storytelling. And I think for this person in particular, that's where unfortunately, networking is going to be super important. You really have to spend time reaching out to people at companies that you're interested in, try to learn from them, do informationals, see, what I was doing when I was, even when I kind of decided, okay, I want to be a recruiter at Cockroach, I was reaching out to other people that I found on LinkedIn, like super random people that I never even talked to, but people that had made the move from sales to recruiting. Tell me about that process. Find those people on LinkedIn. You can find them pretty easily. Another place, actually, just a quick plug, there's a network for women identifying folks called Alpha, ELPHA. I love Alpha. I think it's a great resource. It's basically a network of people who are like experts at what they're doing or looking for career changes, and there's tons of posts in there. If you're like this person, I want to move from marketing to, I don't know, whatever they want to move to, there's probably a bunch of people that are going to comment on, oh, I made that similar transition. Let's chat. Let me tell you about it. Or here's my friend that you should talk to. So again, it's really putting yourself out there. You have to kind of absorb the information first before you can even determine which path is right for you. And again, it's an investment, and you are going to spend quite a bit of time learning on this, but it's better. You want to be feeling pretty certain about this transition before you make it, of course, because there is such an investment involved. So spend the time with those conversations. And then I think from there, you can really craft your outreach to the recruiter or your resume to kind of fit based on those conversations that you've had with other folks that have done that. One question Louisa asked about, I was referring to equity earlier.
Yes, thank you. I was just getting ready to go back there.
Those are stock options. So typically when you join a company pre-IPO, you get what are called options. And that's because we want everyone to be a shareholder in the company. So you have the option to buy a certain number of shares as an employee at a discounted price. As the company gets more and more mature, you'll hear things like RSUs or restricted stock units. Those are typically given to you by a company. And those are to incentivize everyone, right? Like we're stockholders in this company. It will only be successful if we're all doing the best we can do. If we're all working together. We want to build this company together. So when it's an early stage company, you're taking on more risk. So you get a higher ownership in the company itself. As the company becomes more mature, your salary tends to go up, but the options that you have, the stock that you can actually buy tends to get smaller.
Thank you. Thank you so much for going over that. We have 5 minutes left. I want to make sure that we save a little bit of the time here to discuss a little bit more about Cockroach Labs. So let me throw up my slides here again. Now, what you're looking at on your screen, these are some questions that we had asked of Megan prior to today's session. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting was your favorite part about working at Cockroach Labs. Can you talk us through your answer here?
Yeah, so this has been the most impactful part, I would say, about working at Cockroach. And I think this is often true of a lot of small companies in that there's so much area for impact. I feel like I can, be actively recruiting on the roles that I'm working on for the marketing team while also building out processes for making our interview process more scalable, while also working with our CMO on second half headcount strategy, while also working on content, we're like recruiting videos with our video editing team, and working with our coordination team on how do we improve any processes. So I think that, or something that I've just really appreciated from Cockroach is that as long as I'm seeking out those opportunities, I have like endless learning in front of me. And that's something that I also think is important to be mindful of as you're making a career transition. It's one thing to get into the job, right? But it's what you do once you're in it. And so, yeah, I started as a recruiting coordinator. Now I'm a senior recruiter. And it's because I grasped at every opportunity I could. And it's because I really took the initiative to learn as quickly as possible from people like Lindsay and our director of recruiting, Dave, who is an amazing mentor to me and still is, but really leaning into those opportunities to learn. You beat the challenge of getting in, but then what are you doing to really continue to learn once you're in the company? It's been really important. So that's definitely been my favorite part. And I think it just means that I continue to learn how to be an amazing recruiter, hopefully, but also to really drive strategy and how do we take what was like a 30-person team when I started, and now we're 500. There's a big gap between those processes and really ensuring that we're making a scalable interview process.
Oh, I like that. Making sure that it's scalable is huge, right? So I think that is super wonderful. Let's talk about your top tips for someone who's interviewing. So let's say somebody, once gets an interview with Cockroach Labs, in 2 weeks. What do you recommend they do between now and that interview?
Yeah. So the beauty of Cockroach is that we are an open source product, and therefore we've open sourced our interview process. So we provide super clear guidelines of what you are going to be interviewing on. We give you the prep work you need to be successful. And so what that means, again, I feel like this has been a common theme, but you have to put in the work. You have to put in the effort to really prepare. Again, I did not know the exercises that I didn't have any experience in, but I spent a lot of time researching, a lot of time kind of rewriting things and figuring out, what made sense to me and what kind of my thought process was. Do that, spend that time dedicated to kind of learning how your skills can be applicable to these certain exercises. There's a lot that you can absorb, but we're not expecting anyone to be like Cockroach Lab, Cockroach DB experts, unless maybe you're a software engineer. But for a lot of these roles that we're talking about, career transition roles, it's really about putting in that effort, and asking the right questions and being engaged and really showing that you want to be there and like why specifically do you want to be at Cockroach?
Yes. Oof, loving this. Megan, we're out of time for today, but I just want to say huge thank you for joining us today. It has been really lovely to get to learn from you for the last hour. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our audience before we break today?
Well, thank you all for being here. And this is something that's super important to me. I think as a lot of companies, we need to focus more on supporting people that want to make career transitions. So if there is anything that I can help with, or if you want to brainstorm anything or talk through your resume or cover letter, reach out to me. I'm just Megan, MEGAN @cockroachlabs.com, or you can add me on LinkedIn. I really want to be a resource, so please give me a shout.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan. Huge thank you also to our attendees today. Y'all have been absolutely fabulous. There were great questions asked prior to the session as well as during. We're really, really, really happy to see it. It makes my job a lot easier and a lot more fun, really, to learn and hear what y'all are interested in learning. I do see a call out for people's LinkedIns. If you want to, you can find me on LinkedIn. I can't remember if I'm Megan Alexander or Meg Alexander, but you're welcome to reach out to me if you'd like. And then Megan also added that you can find them out or email them at their company email. So that's going to be it for us today. But I just want to say that we have more great programming coming up for you in the next couple days of this week. If this was your first Power to Fly event, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so happy to meet you. If this was your, not your first, if you are a frequent flyer with us, we're so happy to see you again and cannot wait until our next event. Have a wonderful rest of your day, safe, happy, healthy, and we'll see y'all later.